Okay, let's go to this weekend. Steve Robertson, 247 Sports, Gene's page, the Boneyard podcast. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. LSU's coming into town. They have more talent. 11 a.m. game. You know, they didn't play well a couple of weeks ago. They got right against Grambling, whatever. Here we go. Steve, the line's about 9. When you look at what the Mississippi State offensive line has been able to do to date, knowing what LSU, I mean, this may not be their best defensive line, but know the players that they have. What do you think Barbet and Will are going to try to do as they start to install the next few days?
That's really a great question. I think, really what you got to do against LSU to have any hope is, you've got to be able to run wide. That's defensively, they're always going to be strong up front. I mean, that's just LSU. They got shoved around a little bit by Florida State. And I think, 2 weeks into the season, I think people are really starting to appreciate the fact Florida State might be back. Mike was probably coaching for his job. And all of a sudden you look up and, Southern Miss is a very quality G5 team, and they absolutely pushed them all the way around the field, I think you got to be able to burn the edges, and I think you've got to be able to take some shots. And that was one of the things, too, I think a lot of fans were concerned about over the weekend is, Will was very efficient. I don't think anybody's blaming Will Rogers for anything. I think Will played well, but I think he needs more opportunities. I think you have to use the offense and the passing game to kind of spread those guys out, make them defend every blade of grass, and you got to be able to use Woody on the edges. State did not have a ton of success running up the middle against Arizona, and that's not a criticism of your front. It's really a tribute to theirs. And there were some guys too, like Jeffrey Pittman at time missed a hole or two, and but you can't win all game every game. You got to have some guys come in, and I think Seth Davis is a guy that can, and I think Seth could be big in this ball game against LSU because of his foot speed, and he's a guy that's a little bit smaller guy behind a pretty massive offensive line, so I think you run some counter type stuff and you try to get him out there on the edge. But Will Rogers is going to have to play the football to keep his defense honest. If not, you're going to have an offensive performance similar to what you had in that second half, where they're just kind of lining up and determined to stop the run. And probably the biggest question mark I have about the whole thing is Arizona was beat up in the secondary and missing 2 starters, and you didn't have Maldonado for a half. I don't understand why State didn't test that secondary a lot more, especially later in the ball game when they were bringing those safeties up and try to stick the run. Why not take a play action shot? I know there's a couple times they tried to and you just couldn't get it done, but you're going to have to do that against LSU. You're going to have to be able to stretch the field horizontally and vertically to have a chance in this ball game.
Yeah, I think some people aren't going to like this, Steve, but I think a conservative approach is just not the right way. I mean, you're not supposed to win the game. Dan Mullen was unbelievable for his 9 years, considering there were some misses, but start to finish. But I thought Dan was too conservative many a Saturdays went against somebody who out-recruited you by, 20 or so spots, 20, 25 spots. Sometimes you got to let it rip, man, in these games. What is your reaction to kind of my
I think back that 2017 game against Alabama, right, when
he punted on Bama's 41 and you're running for 4.5 yards a carry?
Before that, though, it's like you come out and you punch those guys in the mouth, and State should have won the ball game, and then we go back to the Mullen malaise late. I mean, if Dan continues to call that game with the reckless abandon that he had the first 3 quarters of the game, you probably got some different graphics at Davis Wade Stadium today, because that's how significant that win would have been. But there were some other games, as you mentioned, where Dan kind of played not to lose. I think in a game like this, that's exactly the wrong approach.
I agree.
I go out there from the very first snap and go out there and throw a haymaker, and you never know, it might land. And it gives your team some confidence. We talked about that first drive against Arizona. You give them juice. You can give yourself some juice. You go out there, but if we're just going to go 3 yards in a cloud of dust, next Monday when you and I talk on the phone, there's going to be a lot of really frustrated Mississippi State fans.
Don't miss one moment of the Out of Bounds Show with Bo Bounds. Weekdays, 7 a.m. till 10 a.m. on ESPN 105.9. The Zone.